Welcome to Sparklines, a special podcast series celebrating 15 bright years of Rosov Consulting. I'm Frayda Gonshor Cohen, Managing Director at Rosov Consulting. Each episode of Sparklines will be an opportunity to share some big ideas, thoughts, and learnings from our areas of expertise. We'll include reflections from our team and interviews from our client partners. Toward the end of each episode, we'll share 3 sparks, takeaways that you can use with your team. In this episode, we will take a closer look at global Jewish education, a subject that spans continents and cultures, and yet unites communities in common purpose. Jewish education can vary from country to country, whether it's formal like in day schools or informal like youth programs. Today, we'll highlight some of the shared challenges Jewish educators face across the globe. We'll hear from Rosov Consulting's Alex Pomson and our client partner, Craig Kacev from the Pincus Fund. In our work, we've often had the privilege of observing Jewish education in diverse environments. First, let's consider what we mean by global Jewish education and why it's an important topic. Our resident expert on global Jewish education, Principal and Managing Director Alex Pomson, has lived on 3 different continents and studied Jewish education on most. Alex shares his views on what global Jewish education means to him.
I would say that until relatively recently, I wasn't sure, but I actually think post-October the 7th, it is a thing. I was fortunate to spend 4 days with a group of educators from around the world who had come to Israel to better understand, to show solidarity, to witness what was happening in Israel, and to better understand what was happening here. And what was really powerful was to see how educators from Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Belgium, all over the world, really found themselves identifying with one another, recognizing the extent to which their experiences were shared, and not just with one another as diaspora communities, but with Israelis too, and an appreciation of the fragility of Jewish life wherever we are in the world, and the potential contribution of educators to make a difference to young people's lives and their sense of being part of the larger Jewish whole. And I think that experience with a group of global Jewish educators and seeing how deeply shared the challenges are and the values are among that group was really striking for me.
So, when we think of the ecosystem of Jewish education, what organizations do global Jewish education exactly? What is this niche exactly, and who occupies it? Alex explains.
The best examples we can look at are the work of the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and the Jewish Agency, different institutions working in different ways. In the last decade, let's say, both those entities have, first of all, been able to bring funding to places that hadn't previously had such opportunities, whether on campuses, in schools, in after-school experiences, in youth organizations. The Ministry of Diaspora Affairs has enabled funding to flow across the globe. We've often evaluated such programs, whether youth organizations in France, after-school experiences in the former Soviet Union, Jewish day schools in Latin America, all have benefited from the funding. But it isn't just about the money. I think it's also about raising standards and sharing knowledge, enabling communities that might otherwise be left behind to learn how to do things more effectively and to be challenged to be more impactful in their work.
Jewish educators around the world face many of the same challenges. Craig Kacev, Director of Education at the Pincus Fund, works with Jewish communities outside of the United States and Israel, helping to support innovative educational initiatives. As Craig explains, the Pincus Fund also partners with organizations like the Jewish Agency for Israel to help serve communities around the world.
A really important shift that's taken place in the relationship between Israel and Jewish communities around the world is that in the past, people would know that projects would be developed in Israel and emissaries would go out and try sell communities this wonderful new project. And the level of cynicism around the world was such that eventually when people came with these products for Jewish communities around the world, they would say, sorry, we haven't got time to talk to you. We don't need another product and another idea from Israel. And over the last few years, there's been a tremendous shift in the approach to this relationship between Israel and communities around the world. And that communities around the world used to always fund projects in Israel, you've now got a concerted effort in Israel that says communities around the world supported us and continue to support Israel. But it's time for Israel to be giving back and working with communities around the world.
Just as Israel has historically been centered in previous notions of global Jewish education, the American Jewish community has sometimes played an outsized role in the conceptions of global Jewish education. New conceptions of global Jewish education can broaden our perspective.
America is part of the world and a really important part of the world, and an especially important part of the global Jewish community. But it isn't the world. And I think by virtue of our biographies and the work that we've been asked to do, we are able to kind of correct that perspective a little bit in relation to Jewish education and enable people to see a bigger picture and to see how they are part of a larger enterprise that does go beyond their immediate community.
Taking this global perspective raises a natural question. What common threads connect Jewish educators across different countries and cultures? Through his work with communities worldwide, Craig has encountered firsthand both hyper-local challenges and universal issues that tell us something important about the state of Jewish education today.
Educators around the globe are facing similar challenges in the sense that they're all looking for content. They're all looking to upskill themselves or the educators in their community. There's a tremendous sense of loneliness in many spaces around the Jewish world. There's a shortage of Jewish educators in the pipeline. And so many places set up these wonderful schools only to find that the education that's been offered is the best they can offer in the situation, but there's just no funds to provide more or invest in their people in order to ensure that we're giving our children the absolute best that they deserve. One needs the very best educators in front of every single student. These are global issues, and each place around the world, I suppose, is dealing with these challenges in different ways. And what I find in the conversation is that when you get different people in the room, you start realizing there are solutions. Solutions in one place may potentially work for another place. And so in our work, we tend to find very often we're not supporting projects, but we're saying, hold on a second, the challenge you've got, we've heard it elsewhere in the world, and they've come up with a solution. Why don't we just introduce you? So we've introduced people in Europe to educators in Costa Rica or Peru because we've seen they're dealing with the same issue, and it doesn't need the Pincus Fund's financial support or our mentoring, but it does need two people to have a conversation to see that there's a shared potential solution.
Craig's work is focused on supporting innovative projects in Jewish education, but he emphasized that the issue of talent is just as critical as resources. In many communities, Jewish schools are struggling to attract and retain educators, not because there isn't interest, but because the profession is under-resourced. One creative solution that Craig shared came from Mexico, where a shortage of Hebrew teachers was addressed by tapping into the local Israeli expatriate community.
Over the years, I saw some great success using Shlichim, but not every community can afford that, and not every community wants that. And we saw a community, for example, in Mexico, where a tremendous shortage of Hebrew teachers for a school system that deems and sees Hebrew as so important to what every student is getting. They realized that they had many Israeli families within their community, and one of them had either husband or wife had come to the country to work, and the other had the language but did not have the ability to teach. And so you had a local institution like Hebraica reaching into that community and in a project offering a stipend for these Hebrew speakers to be able to become graduates of a program in which they came out as qualified Hebrew teachers. And a year and a half later, they have now got over 20 qualified Hebrew teachers in the school system, teaching and largely solving a challenge that we're seeing all over the world. And just the simple thing of saying, we have got a resource. How do we upskill that local resource? It was a great example of community taking on the challenge, using local resources, partnering with ourselves as a fund because it was an innovative new project and made a tremendous difference in just 2.5 years.
This kind of grassroots innovation shows how communities can leverage their unique strengths to solve common problems. At Rosov Consulting, we're fortunate to be able to study Jewish education around the world. This provides us with a perspective that is somewhat unique in the field.
I think at Rosov Consulting, we sit in a kind of privileged place where we are able to observe and learn about good practices in different parts of the world and attempt to create connections between those doing the work. We did a study with the King David schools in Johannesburg over an 8-year period where we were helping that school repeatedly take a look at the effectiveness of its approaches to Israel education with students. I'm not aware of many other schools, if any, that have looked so systematically and so thoroughly at the educational outcomes they are creating in relation to Israel in the way that that school has done. And that absolutely can serve as a template, as a model for Jewish schools anywhere, really.
Craig shares how taking a global perspective as a leader at the King David schools enriched his practice.
Let me give you an example of the local and the global for me in the start of my career. Initially as the director of the South African Board of Jewish Education and the King David schools, here was a school system of over 3,000 Jewish students at the southern tip of Africa that said to itself, are we good or aren't we good? Are we excellent? How do we know if we're good on a global scale to the extent that any of our students could measure up or compete with Jewish education anywhere else in the world? And one of the things that I did at the time asking that question is I went for 6 weeks to Canada and to the East Coast of America, visited 10 schools, each for 2 to 3 days with 24 key questions that I wanted to investigate and to see where we were maybe ahead of the curve, where we were behind, what were deep educational approaches being taken, what were some of the trends, what were fads in schools, and be able to assess this as an outsider and take it back to my own environment. And it was eye-opening, and you feel that you're at the tip of Africa, and so you must be light years behind what's going on in the world, and you realize that in actual fact you far ahead in some areas, but yes, you've got so much to learn from other places in the world. And for me, that was the start of a project within our school system where we said there's dozens of areas we can improve. Which are the 2 or 3 biggest levers to create the most change? And over time, it changed as we slowly improved different areas. It also made us realize that our heads of schools need to be visiting schools around the world, whether it's in the States or the UK or Singapore, to be able to get this global feel of education in general and Jewish education specifically. So you do have to play with this polarity of the local, very specific, and then the larger picture, the more macro, and understand how do I gain from one, how do I bring it in? And so it's not an either or. It's one of those, the power of and.
These examples underscore that global Jewish education thrives through a delicate balance, respecting local contexts while learning from global experiences. The value of this kind of perspective taking became readily apparent during the unprecedented challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. What we learned during this period by comparing student experiences in schools around the world revealed fascinating differences in how various communities approach education. Importantly, this research also underscored and amplified the common or shared purposes of Jewish education.
What really stands out for me, and it was very powerful at the time, in part because it was unexpected at that particular moment, was a series of studies we ended up doing in the heart of COVID in the first 12 months of the pandemic. We wanted to find out from students in Jewish day schools around the world, in Europe, North America, and Latin America, about the extent to which they feel their schooling had been disrupted by the pandemic, and the extent to which, while at home, they had been able to connect with other members of their school communities, local Jewish communities, and Jews around the world. And the differences in the data were just astonishing. Was in the sense that they uncovered the degree to which schooling in America and North America is absolutely directed towards the ends. Like the goal being academic achievement, right? Doing well. And schools had done incredibly well transitioning online and maintaining a high quality of school experience while students were at home. And yet where they were not excelling was in terms of enabling their students to feel community with their fellow schoolmates and with other folks in their Jewish community. Where by contrast, in Europe and even more so in Latin America, the schooling piece of this wasn't so successful. But we were seeing seeing in our surveys, and then subsequently we learned more about this through interviews, that young people were feeling more connected to community when they were at home than they had been previously, which was kind of a bit bizarre, right? And digging into it, we uncovered really fundamental differences in orientation to schooling, one which is much more individualistic in North America, where schools are private institutions. You pay a lot of money and you want to get a product in return, and your involvement is directed towards personal achievement. Whereas those schools in Latin America especially have a much more collectivist orientation, much less about the individual and individual success, and much more about joining community without the zoom out effect of seeing in what ways had North American Jewish day school education excelled, and in what ways were students not being helped to navigate this experience because of that very strong academic focus. We wouldn't have seen that without that comparative perspective. It's quite striking that in the second year of the pandemic, day schools in North America were recognizing that you need to actually spend more time on some of that community building work, because that's going to be better for the students' mental health and ultimately may be better for their academic achievement as well.
Even as we focus on student well-being and connection, it all relies on the well-being of their educators. Craig explains.
The real challenge is saying, how do we create resilient Jewish educators that can themselves be resilient and be able to hold the space for whatever tough issues come up for their students of different ages around the world? And that's a tremendous challenge.
As we've seen through these examples, whether in times of crisis or calm, a consistent theme emerges when thinking about global Jewish education: the importance of building resilience in individuals, communities, and across generations. Jewish education can play a large role in connecting learners to something larger than themselves.
So I think for me, if I ask myself a kind of really fundamental question about what are the purposes of education, I think it is to enable a person to locate themselves within something that is larger than themselves, right? And in a Jewish context, larger than yourself may be the Jewish people today. It may be a greater stream of Jewish history, those who came before me, those who may come after me, and it may be some relationship with God, like something bigger than me that I can't put my finger on, right? And I think when it comes to studying Jewish education and research in Jewish education, there too, our work gains greater meaning if we are able to contextualize it as part of something larger, that we don't just think of what we do as all there is, but that it might be different from, it might be a piece of a bigger picture, a bigger puzzle. And the more that we can be aware of those other contexts and those other situations, experiences that are different from our own, the better we come to understand ourselves and the greater meaning we find in the work that we do.
This resilience is more than just an individual trait. It's also about collective strength of a community. In this sense, Jewish education is more than just imparting knowledge. It's about creating connections between students and their heritage, between communities, and across generations. In this series, we end every episode with 3 sparks of insight that can enhance your future evaluations and learning. Our first spark today is global perspectives matter. Whether it's comparing educational programs in day schools in South Africa or talent development in North America, taking a global approach to Jewish education allows us to see new possibilities and learn from each other. Second, community solutions are key. Even as some issues are universal and shared, grassroots innovations like the Hebrew teacher training program in Mexico show that solutions often come from within the community. Leveraging local resources can address even the most pressing challenges. And finally, education builds resilience. Taking global perspectives helps us see that Jewish education isn't just about knowledge. It's about helping individuals understand their place in the larger Jewish story and building connections that strengthen both individuals and communities. Thank you for joining us on Sparklines. As always, resources referenced in today's episode can be found in the show notes and on our website at rosovconsulting.com. Today's episode was hosted by me, Frayda Gonshor Cohen. Thank you to Alex Pomson and Craig Kacev for participating in the episode. Sparklines is a podcast from Rosov Consulting. Our mission is to provide high-quality research, evaluation, and insights to Jewish organizations, enabling them to make informed decisions and to effectively pursue their strategic goals. Today's episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Brian Blumenband. Artwork by Karen Uribe. If you find this episode interesting, share it with a colleague or friend and start a conversation.